My name is Huzir Sulaiman, and I was the playwright of Occupation, which was produced in the 10th anniversary production by Checkpoint Theatre in collaboration with the National Museum of Singapore in 2012. And Occupation was originally a commission of the Singapore Arts Festival in 2002, and it was at that time it was the 60th anniversary of the fall of Singapore to the Japanese. Singapore fell in 1942. This was 2002. I wanted to explore the story of how my grandmother and grandfather met during the war. I was also inspired by, because my grandmother, Khatijah Dawood, or Mrs. M. Siraj, as she's known, and my grandfather, Haji Muhammad Siraj, they both, I think in the 80s, had been separately interviewed by the Oral History Project of the National Archives. My grandmother for her work as a pioneering women's rights activist and feminist in Singapore, and my grandfather because he was a headmaster and principal for education in Singapore, but he was also interviewed for his role in the Indian National Army during World War II that was agitating for the independence of India from the British. So I was struck when I, as the grandchild, had listened to those recordings, I was struck by how there were instances where what I considered interesting answers by my grandmother or grandfather were not given what I assumed would be the appropriate follow-up questions by the no doubt well-intentioned interviewer. And that got me thinking about the subjectivity of history and how we write history in order to reaffirm a kind of already prevailing narrative, one that is perhaps important in the construction of a state identity or a national history. Is there a national agenda that underlies the things that we can hear, the things that we ignore, the things that become part of the stories that we tell?
My name is Claire Wong. I am the director of Occupation, written by Huzir Sulaiman and produced by Checkpoint Theatre. I personally wanted to find a fresh interpretation which was very intimate, very almost interior, because the play is very much about this woman's experience, the woman being Mrs. Siraj when she was a young woman living through the Japanese occupation within the confines of this mansion. She was from a very rich Indian Muslim family, and it was a very cloistered existence during the war, a very different perspective of the war from the typical stories that we have heard about the occupation. So I think personally, one definite strand was a very much more intimate telling of this story, a much more personal experience. I also realized that I am at the age where I value these stories and they've become memories for me, but the younger generation are really need to hear the stories about the occupation, to think about the war. I think there's a huge disconnect between grandchildren and grandparents, for example. I'm beginning to feel the loss of the tellers of those stories, because my father is one of now the last few surviving sibling from amongst his brothers and sisters. Most of them have passed away, and I realized that it was such a big part of my mental landscape in understanding that older generation of the life they led and the life they tried to give us, and I want that to be told. In this case, Jo Kukuthas, a wonderful actress, she was able to access the older character, Mrs. Siraj, very quickly and very instinctively. Possibly because she also had, like myself, many personal inheritance, many stories from the occupation that she had inherited from her mother, from her aunts, from her grandmother, and also of course Mrs. Siraj is alive, and she but interestingly enough, she Jo didn't meet Mrs. Siraj till very late in the process. She didn't want to, and I asked her about that. She said, "No, let me find the character first from the script." And it was only much later when she had done all the groundwork, and then interestingly enough, it's a testament, I suppose, to the script, that the character she created was confirmed when she met Mrs. Siraj in the flesh.